Okay, sorry, it's still, it says it's setting up for live, so it's just taking 1 second.
That's fine. Yeah, just let me know when it's live. Going to edit video.
Okay, sorry, it's still, it says, okay. Hello, everybody. We're going to wait just 1 minute for some people who are joining us. Dr. Cherry, it's nice to see you.
You too. You too.
We're very excited to have Dr. Cherry with us tonight, and we'll be introducing her a little bit shortly.
Yes. I feel so formal being called Dr. Cherry. I know my pediatrician was named that.
All right, well, I think we can get started now. So everybody, welcome to Encore Chamber Music Institute's second YouTube Live of this summer season. We're so excited to have you here listening in. I'm gonna do a little bit of introduction about Encore, some of the other events that we have coming up, and then we are gonna get started with Dr. Nicole Cherry here and her excellent talk on George Bridgetower. So Encore Chamber Music is a music festival here in Gates Mills, Ohio. Every summer we present a concert series and event series filled with all sorts of wonderful artists and topics and lectures, yoga classes, all sorts of things at the Gilmore Academy in Gates Mills. We also have 2 summer training intensives for young artists. Young violinists, violists, and cellists. So right now, listening in, we have the students of our string quartet intensive who have been rehearsing some Mozart and then also some romantic pieces over the course of the last week. They're going to be on campus for 2 more weeks. We're very excited to have them. A little bit about what we have coming up this weekend. Tomorrow, we have a concert with Jinju Cho, our artistic director and totally awesome violinist, playing, as well as Shuai Wang, a wonderful pianist from the Cleveland area, and we are doing a concert called Sparked by Murakami. And so the concert is inspired by Murakami Haruki, the Japanese novelist, and we're doing this amazing program of piano music and then string music as well. So that is tomorrow at 4:30. Prior to the 4:30 concert, there's a 3:30 p.m. lecture with Dr. Lee Makala about Murakami Haruki. So please join us either in person at the Gilmore Academy in Gates Mills or via our live stream on our website. Weekend after that, on June 18th, we have an incredible jazz singer named Evelyn Wright doing a set on Billie Holiday. And then on June 20th, our very own Cavani String Quartet is doing a concert inspired by Rosa Parks. So we're very, very excited for that as well. So for this YouTube Live, everybody here, you are welcome to participate in the chat box. If you're tuning in on Zoom, you can use the Q&A. We'll do a little Q&A comment section after Dr. Cherry's talk here, and I'll be here to facilitate those questions. All right, Dr. Cherry, we are so excited to have you. Dr. Cherry is a professor of violin at University of Texas, San Antonio. She's also in the Marian Anderson String Quartet, and she's here tonight to present her incredible research on the Afro-European violinist, George Bridgetower. So, Dr. Cherry, I'm going to let you take it away from now.
Thank you so much, Clara. Hello, everybody. I'm so glad that you came, and I'm excited to talk about one of my most passionate topics, George Bridgetower, who really is a catalyst for all the things that mean so much to me. But what I'd like to do before I move forward and tell you this story, like kind of Fred Rogers style, I guess, is I would like to start with a little musical teaser, if you will. Because all of this work that I've done has been through a performative lens. I have no musicology degrees, but I have a passion for learning what happened before me and to implement that into my own performance and my own understanding of how my world works through music. So I created a commissioning project called Forge with George. Actually, it was coined by an exchange I had with US Poet Laureate and Pulitzer Prize winning poet Rita Dove, who herself wrote a book in 2009 entitled Sonata Mulatica, which is about, or a poetic reimagining of the story of George Bridgetower. And so inside this exchange, she was encouraging me in my search, and she said, go on, forge with George. And I was like, oh, I'm gonna steal that. So, you know, when you find somebody that's kind of a wordsmith, you know, you kind of steal things sometimes. So that's the name of my commissioning project. So I created a little teaser just to get you to know what it is that I'm doing with this information outside of just searching for it. And we can talk about that in a little bit towards the end or something. But what I do is I find one composer to reimagine some contribution or experience that George Bridgetower has had, and one composer to respond, or same thing, reimagine something that was implemented in the music that I have found of his. So anyway, the first clip is me finding people that really are into things, reimagining King George III's Jubilee, 50th year's Jubilee ceremony. So, and then you'll see the titles after that, but I can explain after as well. So here we go. Something I forgot to do. There, share sound. Like Professor Clorman said yesterday, we always announce that we're sharing the screen, right? Okay, here we go. This was the inaugural work.
Pal around some. Just a couple wild and crazy guys strutting the town like rock stars, hitting the bars for a few beers, a few laughs.
I should mention that this was the inaugural work of Forge with George, and it uses Rita Dove's Sonata Mulatica text by David Wallace. He had me do things that I'd never have done in my life before with this piece. I should just say, is an exploration of cognitive dissonance. Yvette Jackson is the professor of composition at Harvard University, and she's known for her radio operas. So she used tape as well as violin. So it's a piece for violin and tape. And I asked her to connect or disconnect the idea of the spiritual go down Moses and Rossini's Moses in Egypt, as well as link that to Paganini's Variations on a Theme of Moses by Rossini, and talk about, through sound, how those rub against each other. a great composer I met in Texas Tech when I was doing my studies there, and he wrote a piece based on the Serenata of Paganini, which many people were asking him to write trios and things, right? But to speak upon the idea of virtuosity of that time and what it means inside of a 21st century lens in chamber music. Okay, so that's a snippet of the now 15 or so commissions that I have asked from brilliant composers around the world. That last one was by John Cornelius, as you saw, and I asked him to utilize there are 250 types of texts based on the theme God Save the King or My Country 'Tis a Thee, depending on where you're from. And again, I'm being limiting by just calling it those two titles. But he implemented maybe 5 of those different types of texts from all over the world that we've experienced, anywhere from Germany to Canada to America, suffrage to abolitionist texts. So I want to explore that. And of course, George Bridgetower is always the impetus for that, as he wrote a piece based on the theme God Save the King as well. So let me share the screen again. I want to start, of course, I already started, but I want to start again by thanking the ENCORE Chamber Music Institute and Music and Ideas Festival, Jinju Cho, and Annie Fuller from the Cavani Quartet for all creating some energy for me to come and hosting me here today. It's great to be in Northeast Ohio for a little bit. I think you guys are 15 degrees cooler than we are here in San Antonio, Texas. And so I'll take it. It's just gonna get hotter here. So I don't spend a lot of time on beaches, but I do surf a lot, and that is from the internet. And I took a moment to review the philosophy. So if you allow me, I just want to expound on that for a little bit. I did take a look at the philosophy and the mission of the ENCORE Chamber Music Institute, and I felt it resonated so deeply with me. But I was particularly struck by the aim to explore the farthest reaches of their intellect and passion. I think that's so good, right? Because I think no matter what age you are, where you're from, what you're doing, that is something that we can all hold on to and move forward with in our life. That helps us to maintain hope. So it kind of reminded me of a recent lecture that I saw, sponsored by the National Endowment of the Arts, called Sound Health Network. It's a new project initiative for them. And on that panel was the great bassist Esperanza Spalding. And in that talk, she talked about the power of caring for others through music, where the experience of receiving music and engaging with music makes us all feel cared for. I'd never quite heard it said that way, but if you're really thinking about it, that is the truth. The music allows for us to feel, and when we feel, we're connecting. And in so many ways, that is why I continue to do what I do, especially through the guise of a chamber musician, because inside the group, you're connecting. Through the music, you're connecting. Then you're connecting with the community, and it is just a beautiful thing. So I wanted to, I was torn about this, but I'd like to do this exercise. It's kind of weird to do exercise with the fourth wall here, with all up, right? But I'm an artist, so I'm going to do this exercise. And so if you partake in it just a little bit, so what I want you to do is, I would like you to explore what does it look like to explore the farthest reaches of our intellect and passion? What does that look like for me? And so I would love to kind of investigate that just a little to set the tone here. And so I want you to take a look around you, wherever you are, whatever space you are. And I want you to count all the things, let's say, as Esperanza surrounded, that are blue, okay? So take a second to count and look, identify all the blue objects. What are they used for? Why are they blue? Where did they come from? Where'd you buy them? Or where did someone buy them? Do they have to be blue? What shade of blue is it? How does it make you feel? Count those numbers, count the blue. Now, focus in again. And then without looking around, maybe close your eyes. I want you to think about that number and think about how many things are yellow. Yellow isn't there. Is there, but it wasn't our focus, right? So this manipulative exercise was to emphasize that there are infinite amounts of emotions, thoughts, beliefs, interpretations, sounds, dreams, opportunities, smells, points of view, ways to help. And in order to see that, we all have to widen our lens. I think this in its simplest form is also diversity, is a way to diversify. So let the direction of your mentors allow you to see all the blue around you, ask the questions that you have, but also what, where, why, how does anything else beside it sit? Why is it sitting there? Experience everything around you. Explore the farthest reaches of your intellect and passion. So this is how I found my way to Bridgetower. So to continue my streak of being cliche, I will share a quote. I recently read this and it spoke to me. This is by the 20th century wonderful composer Witold Lutosławski. And he says, "I have a strong desire to communicate something through my music to the people. I'm not working to get many fans for myself. I do not want to convince, I want to find. I would like to find people who in the depths of their souls feel the same way as I do. That can only be achieved through the greatest artistic sincerity in every detail of music, from the minutest technical aspects to the most secret depths. I know that this standpoint deprives me of many potential listeners, but those who remain mean an immeasurable treasure for me. I regard creative activity as a kind of soul fishing, and the catch is the best medicine for loneliness, the most human of sufferings." Again, coming back to why is it that we're here discovering this wonderful thing through music that we do. Soul fishing. That quote in many ways defines my purpose and how and why I'm devoted to creating art through chamber music, especially all I can do to serve our communities. As you see here, this is 3 different entities in which the Marian Anderson String Quartet would spend time, not limited to. And I must mention that this is a children's concert that happened at the last minute, but the governance of that town, which I think it was in Mississippi, found a way to have nearly, I think it was 2,000 students come on one day. This was a play we did at Brown University, and this is us playing in the lobby of an intensive care unit. So though the focus tonight is George Bridgetower, this work has been an extension of my personal journey to find my purpose. Exploring the farthest reaches of my intellect and passion, or as a post I saw today on Facebook with the RAL String Quartet, and Annie Fullard said, chamber music is love. Indeed it is. So today's story that I wrote for you is about 30 some minutes or so, and I would like to discuss a bit about me, how George Bridgetower played a role in my life, and share with you George Bridgetower and his community and how those intersect. As a violin performance major all the way through, guys, my document only needed to be 50 pages, but my commitment to finding this information turned into 200. Silly me. But there's still so many questions left. I can't tell it all tonight, but I will talk about his family and their relationship in society, some of his supporters, he had many, and his relationship, yes, with Beethoven. After that, I'd be delighted to connect with you at the end. I believe revisionist history is one of the most essential tools an artist can use to facilitate change and society, uplift society. George Bridgetower is an excellent example of this. He had an extraordinary career, yet in a time when fetishes were trendy, he was labeled a prodigy his entire life, designated as a mulatto, a violinist, a mulatto violinist, and was marketed as the African prince. But by any day's standards, George Bridgetower was a greatly accomplished musician. However, history would have you believe the only thing we need to talk about is his relationship with Beethoven. Austrian student of Beethoven, Nicole Cherry, who was in attendance at the sonata's 1803 premiere, he was 12 years old, mind you, said that Bridgetower's playing on this occasion was so crazy that the audience laughed and laughed. Incidentally, that crazy playing had an impact, and Cherny ended up writing 3, count them, Kreutzer transcriptions. One for 2 pianos, a cello version, which the piano part is in its original state, unchanged, and the variations for solo piano. This highly charged piece inspired Tolstoy's book and Painter Prunet, and by extension composer Janáček, and many, many 20th century film and multimedia artists. I believe there are more than 30 artistic interpretations of the piece, if I remember correctly. But I often wonder, here's my question, what would be different if the name was still Bridgetower?
And now we're pleased to bring you our feature presentation.
I couldn't resist, sorry. The first time I remember seeing George Bridgetower was in the Beethoven movie, Immortal Beloved. And I saw this like nearly 20 years ago. But it wasn't until 2016 that I came across U.S. Poet Laureate Rita Dove's 2009 book called Sonata Mulatica. This story, again, as I said before, brought the George Bridgetower's accomplishments and virtuosity to life. It was upon reading her book, I began to dig deeper, and I began to realize that my artistic purpose stemmed from several interests that seemed to intersect. I love when this happens to me. Some of this intersection was my upbringing. I grew up in a household that was very socially conscious. Part of that was my parents came from the rural South and worked their way up earning college degrees. My dad was a sociologist, first to get a college degree, a doctorate in sociology and African American studies, or Afro-American studies as they called it then. He studied the migration of blacks to the north, particularly the Great Migration to Chicago. My mother's career was in criminal justice, so she had a bird's eye view of what American society was dealing with. So my upbringing was always layered with the reality of my own heritage and legacy. And they in turn continually surrounded me with community that reflected diversity. My music life was no less compound. This first picture here, I didn't start private lessons till a little bit later in my student life, but I had the pleasure of having a very forward-thinking private teacher, Sally McLean, in Washington, D.C. area. And she would often give me, I'll tell you how old I am, cassette tapes to take home. And they would be just a hodgepodge, a mix of different things. And those of you who have ever worked with a cassette tape know that if you don't take a note of what's on there, you may never remember. You may never, it's just one big thing. So I was young, and she put all the Bartók quartets on there. So I loved it. In fact, after school, I would plop this in the cassette player, and since, members of the Quartet Ben are coming, woof, right? But this is what I listened to after I came home from school. And so it's kind of like, my ear was being developed, and that was the 80s. So and then my ear was being developed in that sense that beyond, Mozart, and which are great, and Haydn, which are great. But this is something I was just drawn to, and so what does that say about me? I have no idea, but that's one example. Another example I'll have to share, this is my brother, and he's extremely experimental. He's a professional bass player, and he went to Manhattan School of Music and lived in New York. We have a certain amount of time of age difference, and I remember visiting him in New York when I was still in secondary school. He was actually beginning his professional career. He picked me up from the Amtrak, and I was so exhausted. It was a late trip. I was a kid, and he brought me straight to his gig. Okay, sorry, Mom. I think my mom's so I don't know if she knows this story. But anyway, so I'm young, and he brings me to the Knitting Factory, extremely famous, popular club for avant-garde jazz in New York. And he was at the time playing with the Charles Gale Trio. And so just to give you an idea, I was so tired. I just sat down. He had a friend that was a bartender that day, and here I am sitting there just drinking Coca-Cola. And I actually was nodding off. So this is what I was nodding off to. So again, just to give you an idea of the type of musics that I was listening to. On top of that, my father had minored in music, and like clockwork after dinner, he'd play piano, and again, it would be Schumann, Chopin, John Coltrane, Miles Davis, Mozart, just one after the other. And as a little girl, I didn't even know which one was which, really, but I heard all these sounds. And so again, it just kind of broadened my sense, I believe, of what is the definition of music. So I didn't realize that the rest of the world was not necessarily like this, but I have found now so many people that are teaching me more about it. And it was my determination to have a better understanding. This determination led me to George Bridgetower. History remembers London-based African-European violinist George Augustus Polgreen Bridgetower as the brilliant original dedicatee of one of Ludwig van Beethoven's most challenging violin works, Sonata for Violin and Piano, Opus 47, premiered by both artists in May 1803 at the Obergarten in Vienna, Austria. Bridgetower's immense compositional skills were exposed, reading over Beethoven's shoulder and improvising virtuosic violin passages. Tonight, I would like to expand on that story a bit. George Bridgetower, known as the African Prince, was born in 1779 in Biała, Poland, to a German mother, Maria Sovinki, and Afro-Caribbean father, John Friedrich. George Bridgetower's virtuosity and skill as a violinist earned him the adoration and praise of audiences spanning Western Europe. According to Bridgetower's passport, he identified as mulatto, and he was listed as medium height, swarthy complexion, dark brown hair, brown eyes, and a rather broad nose. His father's escape from slavery led to George's solo debut in Paris at the age of 9 years old at the Concert Spirituel. The Concert Spirituel was one of the first concert series and attracted the world's leading concert artist. George Bridgetower was an acclaimed touring artist in Europe, and after his iconic 1803 visit with Beethoven in Vienna, Bridgetower returned to London to perform and teach. He earned a Bachelor of Music degree from Cambridge University and also actively performed with the Philharmonic Society of London. George's great fame as a violinist can be greatly attributed to his father, John Friedrich. John Friedrich Bridgetower was born in Bridgetown, Barbados. He likely adopted that name Bridgetower from the seaport town, Bridgetown. Bridgetown is the capital of Barbados and its largest city. A significant portion of the slave trade from Africa passed through Bridgetown. To protect himself from returning to the helms of slavery, John Bridgetower had many aliases. He often identified himself as Friedrich Augustus Bridgetower, as well as the Abyssinian prince. John Bridgetower found his way to Europe by way of escape, probably around the year 1770. How he managed to get there remains a mystery, but it was then he began a life that he hoped would end his family's association with the cruelty of slavery. By 1778, John Bridgetower was a servant to Prince Radziwill in Biała, Poland. Here, he likely met his wife, Maria Anna Sovinki. It is unclear whether she was a servant there. Some sources say that she was royalty herself, the daughter of a Polish count. Maria Ann Sovinki lived the majority of her life in Dresden, Germany, recovering from illness. George Bridgetower was born a year after they met in 1779 and baptized Hieronimo Hippolito Augusto, named after John Bridgetower's employer. John Friedrich had two sons, George the eldest and his younger brother, also named Friedrich, who they called Friedrich II. He was a talented cellist in his own right and played the cello primarily to support himself and his mother living in Dresden. I've seen sources that he played at least twice with his brother George. In 1780, John Friedrich, with George in tow, journeyed to Vienna and with his clever ways became a personal page to Prince Nicholas Esterhazy at his country estate in Eisenstadt. This was indeed the time that Joseph Haydn was court composer. Within the next 10 years, John Bridgetower toured his son throughout Poland, Austria, France, Italy, and England to build his notoriety. Of particular significance to George's career was a performance in May 1805, same year Beethoven's concerto was written, at the concerts at Hanover Square, which were sponsored at the time by musical impresario Johann Peter Salomon, who sponsored many, if not all, of Haydn's concerts there. I should just mention the Hanover Square Rooms was established in 1774 by none other than J.C. Bach and an impresario, Sir John Gallini. The Hanover Square Rooms was the principal concert venue in London. That 1805 concert featured Beethoven's Septet, Opus 20 in 6 movements. It is scored for clarinet, horn, bassoon, violin, viola, cello, and double bass. So the performance included many of the court musicians, as well as his brother, Friedrich II, George, on violin, and famed bassist Domenico Dragonetti. That's who you see here. And here's a picture of a pencil, of a sketch, I should say, of the Hanover Square Rooms. Completed in 1800, this was very likely the London premiere of the work, I believe. Notable for 1803, this is our famous year, Beethoven arranged this work also for violin, clarinet, and piano. Unfortunately, I have not played the septet yet, but I have played PDQ Bach's version, the Schlepptet, which is so fun. Let's see. There we go. Without any personal wealth, just a little bit about what John Friedrich was doing on the other side here. Father Bridgetower sought out ways to further the career of his young prodigy son. Upon his first years in London, he dressed in Turkish clothing and called himself the Abyssinian Prince. John Bridgetower believed that grooming George Bridgetower as a Turkish violin prodigy would set him apart and build his reputation. As was the fascination of the day, anything culturally non-European was considered exotic and generally labeled as Turkish. Though John Friedrich's dress was considered outrageous, it was not that unusual. Turkey's Ottoman Empire was quite influential in southeastern Europe in both the military and cultural areas. As we know, Haydn, Mozart, Beethoven, many others have all found these sounds so intriguing in their own music. English writer Jane Girdham describes the popularity of the Turkish Janissary Band in her book, Black Musicians in England. She says, while some Black musicians became professional soloists, others joined military bands. In the last decade of the 18th century, these musicians were distinguished by their skin color and elaborate costumes and playing of Turkish instruments. So you can see here in this picture that this is likely the dress of George Bridgetower's father. Included here, you see the trousers or the salvar, and then what has become worldwide popular, the kaftan, right? I wear those all the time. The sarik on the head, and the yemeni on the feet. As well, all the 18th century guard bands in England employed Black percussion players who originated from the West Indies. Let us not forget that John Friedrich is from the West Indies. They also were dressed similarly to the Turkish military band members. Here you see headdress of the front line of an English guard band and how similar the headdress is to the Turkish headdress, standard dress. This is a deflection, right? Is what that was. John Friedrich was clearly the catalyst in building George's career. However, his relationship with his son, George, escalated, and purported physical abuse brought the father's control over his son to an abrupt end. The Prince of Wales, soon to be King George IV, ordered the father into exile and patronized young Bridgetower for nearly a decade. So let's turn to some of Bridgetower's influential community. Patronage did not always manifest itself in dollars and cents, and Bridgetower's lifestyle became royal by the help of many. His primary patron was the Prince of Wales. In the height of his career, Bridgetower maintained close associates with some of the leading musicians of the time, and it is the Prince of Wales that is responsible for Bridgetower's success. In addition to performances with the Prince Regent's Band, Bridgetower performed in many of the most celebrated venues, including several times at Paris's Concert Spirituel. He was a regular performer at London's Drury Lane Theatre, Windsor Castle, Brighton Pavilion, and the Pump Rooms at Bath. Between 1791 and 1792, good news, Joseph Haydn and George Bridgetower performed together for the concerts at Hanover Square. I believe it was a solo Vivaldi with Joseph Haydn at the keyboard. George was also a part of the 1791 Handel commemoration held in Westminster Abbey. In 1807, Bridgetower became a member of the Royal Society of Musicians, the oldest music-related charity in Great Britain, founded in 1738. Bridgetower also had the honor of becoming voted in as a member of the esteemed Philharmonic Society of London, later named the Royal Philharmonic Society. Bridgetower was one of the 30 original members in 1813. Notable works that the Society commissioned during Bridgetower's time was Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, the Choral Symphony, and Mendelssohn's Italian Symphony. I have to tell you that I read this again. When I found this fact, it didn't sink in because I've been questioning whether Bridgetower might have known Mendelssohn, but this might prove it, that they at least had some connection. They were in the same room at some point. With a career this dynamic, there was not a shortage of people in the royal court anxious to hear the young boy perform. Charlotte Louise Henriette Papendiek was no exception. She was the attendant for Queen Charlotte, wife of King George III. Miss Papendiek gives clarity to many questions in the Bridgetower story in her memoir, The Court and Private Life in the Time of Queen Charlotte. It reflects upon Miss Papendiek's life while living in Windsor Castle. Aren't we so grateful that the Royal Archives decided it was appropriate to publish the works and writing and diary of an 18th century woman servant? Amazing. Her first entry presents the first time that she and John Friedrich met. She says, "About this time, an adventurer of the name of Bridgetower, a black, came to Windsor with a view of introducing his son, a most prepossessing lad of 10 or 12 years old, and a fine violin player. He was commanded by their majesties to perform at the lodge, when he played a concerto of Vivaldi's and a quartet of Haydn's, whose pupil he called himself. Both father and son pleased greatly, the one for his talent and modest bearing, the other for his fascinating manner, elegance, expertness in all languages, beauty of person, and taste in dress. He seemed to win the good opinion of everyone and was courted by all and entreated to join in society." Miss Papendiek later speaks of John Friedrich's last visit before he was exiled by the Prince of Wales. "On return home, I told John Bridgetower never again to ask us to lend money, for we had already done what we could. He, of course, was not well pleased with this speech, but I began, as did many others, not to be altogether satisfied with his conduct." And another Papendiek writing resounds about Bridgetower. The young performer played to perfection. Bridgetower had always been remarkable for his elegant and bold manner of drawing the bow. Despite their misgivings about John Friedrich, their adoration for young Bridgetower was devout, and Windsor was grateful to have him before them. Also among Bridgetower's admirers are his esteemed teachers and colleagues. He has worked with Johann Hummel, Mozart student Thomas Atwood, Giovanni Giannovici, Francois Bartholomew, English organist and composer Samuel Wesley, and Franz Clement, the dedicatee of Beethoven's iconic violin concerto. Papa Joseph Haydn, as we mentioned, is amongst this grand list, and incidentally, George often played the quartets of Austrian French composer Ignaz Pleyel. However, I don't know if they ever met. Samuel Wesley is of particular significance to Bridgetower's contribution because of his interest in Bach. Samuel Wesley was a well-known Bach enthusiast, a prodigy of the violin and organ, and was an accomplished composer. He was the son of Charles and nephew of John Wesley, who were leaders of the Methodist Church. During the years 1797 and 1815, Wesley and Bridgetower corresponded, leaving 10 known letters written by Wesley to Bridgetower. One letter relays Wesley's interest in Bridgetower's Bach performance and requests him to perform the Bach solo sonatas and partitas at his brother's home. It reads, "My dear sir, I beg to leave to inform you that I shall be happy to know when and where I am to make good my promise to my brother of hearing you execute the exquisite solos of Bach. If you name any evening within a week hence, I will make it convenient to attend your appointment, and upon obtaining your answer, will immediately acquaint my brother. Most truly yours, Samuel Wesley, July 1814. Wesley sends another letter to Bridgetower regarding this acquisition in September of 1814. He says, "My dear sir, had I not the pleasure of lending you Bach's violin solos some time since? I have been searching diligently, though hitherto in vain, but I shall be delighted to know that they are in your safe keeping. Johann Salomon has a printed copy, which I have seen, and which I fancy is the same edition as your own." You know what this means, right? That George Bridgetower had one of the first copies of the newly published solos and partitas by J.S. Bach. Samuel Wesley's letters are equally entertaining and important references. For instance, many historians have reported the first documented performance of Bach's magnificent chaconne was by violinist Ferdinand David in Leipzig on February 8, 1814. According to Samuel Wesley's letter to friend and music publisher Vincent Novello, the first documented public performance of the chaconne was of George Bridgetower in 1814. That letter states, "Among the tunes played by Bridgetower were a trio of Mozart, 2 of Purcell, and 1 of J.S. Bach. Another ranged from the first prelude and fugue of the second book, the chaconne, and the fugue in C from the sonatas and partitas." July 1814. What is incredible is that Bridgetower, from these letters, we learned that he owned, as I said, one of the original first editions of the Bach solos. And again, in 1803, we know that German music publisher Nikolaus Simrock printed the complete publication of the Bach works. A lot going on in 1803. A particular interest to me was a 1797 letter Wesley writes to Bridgetower that may imply a composition dedication to Bridgetower. On February 19th, 1797, Samuel Wesley has completed his first and only work for piano and violin, entitled Duet for Piano and Violin. He composes this piece 4 days before he sends a letter to Bridgetower requesting his presence at his music reading party. It states, "If Mr. Bridgetower should oblige Samuel Wesley and his friends so far as to acquiesce in their request, and will have the goodness to return a line by the bearer, informing at what hour Mr. Bridgetower could suffer his violin to be brought, a proper and careful porter shall attend for that purpose. Samuel Wesley, Thursday, February 23rd, 1797. Again, this is 4 days after he writes this letter, after he wrote that sonata, asking Bridgetower to come and play some music with him. And please come, because I'll get somebody to carry your violin for you, so you don't have to worry about it. Has anybody ever done that for you? Nobody's ever done that for me. Here is a sample of that, very, very small sample of that duo. Sorry. So you can tell the Bach influence in there, especially with the contrapuntal piano line going on there. Okie dokie. Well, I can't talk about Bridgetower without talking about the great Viotti. It was Italian violinist Giovanni Battista Viotti who was one of Bridgetower's primary violin teachers. And Bridgetower undoubtedly premiered many of Viotti's violin concerti. Still looking for proof of the premieres. Viotti's works were a staple in his repertoire, and the two apparently had a wonderful relationship. Viotti is known as the teacher of both Pierre Rode and Pierre Baillot. Along with Rudolf Kreutzer, they were all teachers at the Paris Conservatory. Considered the founder of the French violin school, Viotti is associated with technique development through the modern torte bow. It should be noted that Bridgetower played on a 1715 Stradivarius, noted in his estate. He had other stuff too, on a Amati and a Betz bow. I should mention, I not too long ago, I called Tarisio, a fine violin shop in New York, and talked to Anthony Satorsky just to get some more specific information, because I really would like to find which 1715 Strad did Bridgetower play. I've narrowed it down a little bit, but I do know that there are only 14 1715 Stradivarius. So it still makes it difficult, but it's not 200. So still looking for that, but it's, when I find out, I will let you know. Actually, not supposed to turn that yet. Samuel Wesley left the following appreciation of Bridgetower regarding Viotti. George Bridgetower, whom they used to dominate the African prince, is just to be ranked with the very first masters of the violin. He practiced much with the celebrated Viotti and imbibed primarily of his bold and spirited style of execution. And again, as I do more research, I'm searching for how he played, right? What he was capable of, and how we can see that is through his music. And of course, so grateful for people like Wesley writing letters and Papendiek telling us what they heard in his playing. The objectification that Bridgetower inherited becomes more apparent with a father that exploited him, the Prince of Wales who collects him, and Beethoven, who in George maybe saw some form of reflection. I'd love to, if you'd like, talk more about that, but after a performance before the royal family, the prince writes George a poem in a way to romance the young boy. The words also sum up the prejudice he faced. It reads, "On the musical phenomenon, while sable Afrique's royal son through the sweet maze of music run, and by his mingled powers of play made majesty or grave or gay, the mighty monarch was beguiled and owned a master and a child." The text of this poem indicates that the possession of a dark-skinned African child came with idealistic fascination. To own a Moor, to own a young child, prodigious child, was a status symbol. England didn't really have one like Italy had one, and Germany, and so in my research, I find that there is this urgency for the royals to have the precious one. So if it were not for Bridgetower's status as exotic, is it probable Beethoven would have never noticed him? Here we have the original manuscript of the sonata, at least the first page. And even as great friends as they were, Beethoven dedicates this sonata, Opus 47, like this: "The Mulatto Sonata, composed for the mulatto Bridgetower, my great mulatto composer and lunatic." I think we get your point, Beethoven. I think he adored his playing, but there was something about him being mulatto, as he mentioned it 3 times in the manuscript. Bridgetower may have been a master violinist, nicknamed the African Prince, but George Bridgetower was not merely a spectator when it came to music. His exposure to Joseph Haydn and attaining a Bachelor of Music from Cambridge University offered him the knowledge to be versed in many areas of music, including composition. There's almost no discussion about his compositions, which I find curious, so I'll share a little bit with you today. To date, there are 7 known pieces by George Bridgetower. So far, I possess 4 of them. A musicologist, rest in peace, Dominique Delerma, suggested that several chamber music, solo, and symphonic works have existed. My ultimate goal is to acquire his violin concerto. In fact, that is where this all began for me, realizing that he had a violin concerto written in 1802, 3 years before Beethoven's violin concerto was written, and 1 year before their premiere. Bridgetower had premiered that concerto of his 2 times already. So I suspect that Beethoven heard that in some way or another. Fragments of this piece may be held in Dr. Delerma's extensive archives left at the Center for Black Music Research after his death. Everybody in this room who's watching has been affected by the last 1.5 years, and my plan was to go up there and dig through his uncatalogued research to find even a little snippet of that concerto. Hopefully soon things will open up nice and healthy, and I'll be able to do that. Another work, his anthem, which was written for his graduation exercise at Cambridge in 1811, titled "By Face Sublime, Fair Past Flora, Steers His Pilgrimage Along This Vale of Tears." It was written for chorus and orchestra. And again, like Henry, which I'll talk about in a little bit, as art song, the text is by F.A. Rowden. I'm currently hunting for this piece and have had many discussions with archivists and professors at Cambridge to do so next year and find that piece. So excited. The 4 works I have are his works that were published during his patronage years. Those are Jubilee, Variations on Rule Britannica and God Save the King, for flute, 2 violins, viola, and cello, composed in commemoration of King George III's Jubilee ceremony in 1809. It was published by Clementi and Company in Italy. Henry, which I mentioned just briefly, a ballad, again text by F.A. Rowden, was written in 1811 and was published in London by Monzani and Company. This was premiered by coloratura Elizabeth Farone, who was considered Britain's first international star. I should actually mention that I was searching high and low in the United States trying to find any recordings of Bridgetower. Amazingly, you can actually go on YouTube and find a few performances of Henry now, because Indiana University, Jacobs School of Music, did a performance on a Black Composers Concert in 1969 of this piece. It was reel to reel, and so they wouldn't give it to me. But I'm so glad that people are now taking the time to perform this work and record this work again. So hopefully I'll get out to Jacobs and just hear what that sounded like as well. Then Diatonica Harmonica for the pianoforte. This is probably around the time that he studied with Thomas Atwood. This work consists of 41 etudes for piano dedicated to his students and was published by London publisher Robert Birchall in 1812. This work was likely written, as I said, during his studies of keyboard and composition with Thomas Atwood. I find this piece particularly special because he writes a significant preface to it inside the music. And I'll just read a portion for you. It says, "In presenting the following little work to the public, I am influenced by a desire of offering to students in music, that which may unite instruction and amusement, the former as necessary for their improvement, the latter as an inducement to the frequent practice of that style of playing on the pianoforte." Interesting, inside that booklet of etudes, there is a Polonaise. And so being that he was born in Poland, I was very curious about that. Of course, Bach wrote plenty of what we call Polonaises, but not in the sense of Chopin. But it's not that extensive, the etude itself. But I just found it interesting that in print, besides Bach and maybe some of Bach's more contemporaries, we don't see the word Polonaise come up till the miniatures of Frédéric Chopin, and at least in the lineage of Polish music. So I hasten to say that George Bridgetower influenced Chopin in the Polonaise. No, I'm not saying that. And finally, we have an arrangement of Cherubini's celebrated overture to the heroic opera Ladoiska. Beethoven was a great fan of his writing and claimed him to be the greatest composer of his contemporaries. In 1791, Cherubini composed opera Ladoiska, but the Vienna premiere was in 1803, just about a month before the sonata Opus 47 premiere between Beethoven and Bridgetower. So Cherubini, Beethoven, and Bridgetower were all in Vienna at the same time. Cherubini did have the opportunity to meet Beethoven, possibly met Bridgetower as well. So I want to share with you a clip of this quintet. This is actually for the same instrumentation as Jubilee. It's flute, violin, 2 violins, viola, cello. And what I find so amazing is how intricately he simulates the sound of the orchestra within the quintet. It clearly has an amazing ear. So I will play for you an excerpt from the Orchestre Nationale de France with Muti. Hopefully there will be no... So that's the original Cherubini version. And then here is, asked a few students to play Bridgetower's version. Yes, so clearly this arrangement of Bridgetowers was likely inspired by his friendship with Beethoven and probably also had a fondness for Cherubini's music. Okay, coming to the penultimate moment of the lecture, just a few more. I have to talk about Beethoven and Bridgetower. Of great intrigue to me is the friendship between Beethoven and Bridgetower. Bridgetower arrived in Vienna from Dresden after visiting his ailing mother in July 1802. He was well equipped with letters of introduction from both London and Dresden. It was because of Prince Lichnowsky who introduced Bridgetower to Beethoven at a gathering that the two became fast friends. Prince Lichnowsky was an avid supporter and patron of Beethoven, and though they two had a rocky relationship, on one hand, writing lessons, it's known that Beethoven wrote letters of how fond he was and good friends and companions with Lichnowsky. And then there's another account where he went to his house and ransacked it. So, I guess we could say that that is not unusual for our friend Beethoven. Beethoven dedicated 7 of his works to him prior to 1806, including the Opus 1 piano trios. In May 1803, Beethoven wrote a letter of introduction for Bridgetower to Baron Alexander Wetzler. Within it he says, "Herr Bridgetower, a very able virtuoso and an absolute master of his instrument. He not only performs his concertos, but is also an excellent quartet player. I earnestly hope that you will obtain him a wider circle of acquaintances. Yours obediently, Beethoven." Notice he said he not only performs his concertos. I believe that he had heard him do that. The premiere. So what about this famous day? It was 8 a.m. at the beautiful Ogerton. The concert was sponsored by Prince Lichnowsky and was well attended by an esteemed group of patrons and supporters of Beethoven. Some in attendance were Prince Esterhazy, Russian Prince Lichnowsky, who introduced the two, yes, Prince Lavkowitz, and Count Razumovsky, who was also in attendance that morning. And 3 years later, in 1805, Razumovsky asked Beethoven to write the 3 Opus 59 string quartets. Beethoven's friend and student Ferdinand Ries tells us that Beethoven called him at 4:30 that morning and asked him to copy the violin part of the first movement. The piano part was just sketched. The second movement variations were incomplete, and Bridgetower had to play his violin part from an illegible manuscript over Beethoven's shoulder. On top of that, Beethoven grabbed the last movement from the finale of another piece, the Sonata for Piano Violin Opus 30, number 1. The idea that Beethoven stopped working on the Eroica Symphony to finish the Opus 47 Violin Sonata speaks to the magnitude of that sonata, meaning it's crazy hard. As for Bridgetower's contribution to the sonata, Beethoven writes, "My sonata for piano forte and violin, dedicated to George Bridgetower, is a success. I had barely finished it by the first performance, though, and so George had to read his part over my shoulder as I played at the piano. He even changed some parts, which I gratefully admit he improved. I presented him with a gift, a tuning fork, as a token of my admiration. Signed, Beethoven." Well, what parts did he change? I'm still looking for all of the parts he possibly changed, and I believe there was much more. But every source that discusses Bridgetower mentions this flourish that he improvised on the violin during the premiere. This flourish was an imitation of Beethoven's arpeggio in the piano part. Thanks goes to editor John Thirlwell, who interviewed Bridgetower in his later life for preserving that flourish that Bridgetower had written on his own music. Bridgetower's ability to actualize that arpeggio on the spot gives us a glimpse into his capability on the violin. A note from Bridgetower that he wrote on his manuscript of the sonata says, "When I accompanied Beethoven in this sonata concertante at Vienne at the repetition of the first part of the presto, I imitated the flight at the 18th bar of the pianoforte part of this movement. Beethoven jumped up, embraced me, saying, 'Noch einmal, mein lieber Bursch, one more time, my dear fellow.' Then Beethoven held the open pedal during this flight, the chord of the sixth, as at the 9th bar." Here's an example. Here's, of course, that opening presto, the first movement. Here's one version. This is the first time. It actually looks a little different in the repeat, but this is the first time, the flourish that he played, and I would like to play that for you. Oops. So I have to thank Dr. Natalia Sukina, who teaches at Texas Tech University, for that amazing playing. So that is an example of what exactly happened in the premiere. Pardon me. Once more with that. So Bridgetower told Thirlwell that when it was written, he and Beethoven were constant companions, and the first copy of the sonata was a dedication to him. But ere it was published, they had some silly quarrel about a girl, and in consequence, Beethoven scratched out the name of Bridgetower and inserted that of Kreutzer, a man who he had never seen and never played it. So I'd like to speak on this thought just a little bit. And though we know Beethoven was no stranger to confrontation, I believe the argument came on the heels of Beethoven's already intense feelings about Napoleon. In fact, when I mentioned that he went to Lichnowsky's estate and kind of trashed a few things, that was because Lichnowsky had asked him to play for some French aristocracy, and he refused. And he was like, "How dare you ask me to do such a thing?" And got very angry. So he was definitely in that area of time, French Revolution, 1803, very passionate about his beliefs. We have to very much admire Beethoven for standing up to his values there. Though, so I put together a recent theory about this argument. I came across a letter from Beethoven to Bridgetower regarding a visit to Countess Josephine Brunevik von Diem's home. This is the same woman some historians presume is Beethoven's immortal beloved. I know that a lot of people believe it's different women, Brentano, etc., etc. The letter reads, "Go, my dear Bridgetower, at about noon today to Count Diem's, that is to say, to the same house where we both were the day before yesterday. Those people would probably like to hear you play one of your compositions. Until then, I look forward to seeing you today And in the meantime, I take pleasure in merely remembering you, your friend, Beethoven. German music critic Otto Jahn says Beethoven frequently visited Countess Diem's during the time he and Bridgetower played the Kreutzer Sonata. If this indeed is Beethoven's immortal beloved, it is probable and unfortunate that Countess Diem is the alleged woman Bridgetower insulted and thus ended his friendship with Beethoven. Recently, I don't know if you all saw in a New York Times article, Patricia Morisseau, who's a New York Times writer, she recently released a book called Beethoven, the Woman in the Moonlight. And she did an article a few months ago, just before the new year, that featured Bridgetower. And so, of course, I reached out to her and I had to ask her who she thought it was. And in a response, she says, "I'm biased, of course, but I always thought the woman was Julie Guicciardi. In May 1803, he wrote to Bridgetower to meet him at a Graben coffee house before going to dinner at Countess Guicciardi's. I presume he's referring to Julie's mother, Susanna, but I suspect Julie would have been there." So there are a few theories about that. Just weeks later, Beethoven, true to form, states that Bridgetower has no manners. At 26, a young man should know his place. He has dared to insult a woman with whom he knows I am in love. I will never speak to him again, and I've already renamed his sonata after another great violinist, Rudolf Kreutzer. From this letter, we know that Beethoven and Bridgetower were close friends for at least 2 years, the premiere having been when Bridgetower was 24. According to Berlioz, in his book Voyage musical à l'Allemande et en Italie, Kreutzer never performed the work, considering it outrageously intelligible. Even so, the work was published in 1805 by Nicholas Simrock. The new title translated as Sonata for Piano and Violin Obbligato in a concertante style, almost like a concerto, dedicated to Rudolf Kreutzer. After this great musical moment, not very detailed information is written about our dear Bridgetower. We do know that by 1816, George Bridgetower was married to Mary Leech, and they had a daughter who, as an adult, lived in Italy. At this time, he was likely working with composer Thomas Atwood at the Royal Academy of Music and continued performing and teaching. There are some important questions left unanswered. For example, we know he spent his latter years moving from within Germany, Italy, and France. Is it probable that Bridgetower met or performed with Felix Mendelssohn, Niccolò Paganini, and Hector Berlioz? If he went back to his birthplace in Poland, perhaps he also connected with Frédéric Chopin. In February 29, 1860, George Bridgetower died in Peckham, London. According to Bridgetower's estate records, Bridgetower possessed a cello, a viola, 2 violins by Antonio Stradivarius, a violin by Amati, and a bow by Betz. His tombstone reads, George Bridgetower, Esquire, died the 29th of February, 1860, 78 years old, and is buried in London's Kensal Green Cemetery. This tombstone leaves another question, actually, that you see here. I received these pictures from a very generous photographer, Peter Hughes, just before I was finishing the degree. It's a few years ago. And if he died at 78 years old in 1860, that would make him born in 1782, not 1779. So the search continues. And as we search, it is crucial to revisit and actualize the events of the past. We also must perform these discoveries. Documentation of the past is imperative to the survival of the historical truth. Beethoven and Bridgetower transcended this sonata for piano and violin, opus 47, as 2020 marked the 250th anniversary of Beethoven's birth. I'm grateful to Beethoven and his openness to befriend Mr. Bridgetower, because more than 2 centuries later, they have both given us all something quite profound to think about. Thank you so much. And if there are any questions, I'd be happy to take them.
Thank you. That was really, really amazing. What amazing, the amount of research you've been able to pull out and draw out. So right now we are going to take any questions in our Zoom Q&A or in our YouTube live chat box. So leave those in there and we will answer them.
I could go on for days and days. So I was like, wait a minute. Every time I got to a different portion, I was like, wait, do they want to know this? It's like, I'm just like, wow, the drawing patterns is just so interesting to me. You know, it could be anyone, just kind of connecting these dots is like, you know, so fascinating to me. So I think as musicians, as performers, we just have to continue to do these things.
I love what you said about starting from a performer's perspective and really coming at your research with the questions of what are you able to perform and what are you able to bring out, not necessarily from a musicologist's point of view, but from somebody who's really playing and hearing
Exactly.
the world.
Exactly.
Incredible.
Well, we're come to a time where it's like, we're capable of being inventive about the programs. I mean, ENCORE is a great example of that. Just be kind of, dare I say, cliche again, out of the box about how we're presenting programs. And so I use those commissions to actually just draw connections. And so each piece, there's that penultimate commission, but then I string together, literally, other pieces that connect and tell a story. And it's kind of interesting. Recently, I saw an interview with Oprah and the star of Underground Railroad. I forgot her name, but I haven't seen it yet, really. But she talks about how she had to have a therapist on the set. I mean, that's how engaged she got in the role. And I think as performers, as music performers, we can reach a little further and be that engaged in what we bring to the stage. And so that's what I think I'm passionate about that. Like my mom says, maybe you should have got a theater degree, right? And I think if I got a theater degree, I probably, would be doing something else, I just can't make up my mind, but anyway.
We have a question from our Zoom Q&A. What has the research process been like, and was it difficult to find information about Bridgetower?
Yes, it was difficult. However, it was difficult because I for so long was kind of, with the exercise I did with the blue and yellow, right? I was so stuck in, okay, I have to do a recital and it should be you have a Beethoven, and it should have a Schubert, and it should have a, Ives, and and so it was hard for me to see outside of that box a little bit more and ask the right questions. I think that's the key. It's just like, what do I want to know? And so I have to figure out what the questions are first. And if you don't know the questions, talk to other people that are asking these kinds of questions. So I had a lot of talks with different musicologists, different historians of different types of fields. It's interesting how interlinked they all and how they intersect, where it is that Chris Smith, chair of musicology at Texas Tech, knows professor of history at University of Houston, and somehow the information ties in and I can find more. But honestly, to actually flip that coin, it was a little easier than it should have been. Right? So it was hard for me just not being used to churning out, finding research. But really, a lot of what I found was just in the British Library. So it's kind of like, this feels awful, right? Because I'm just if I was in London, I'd go, can I check out Bridgetower's music? Sure. Oi. It's not like I was, whoa, oh, here's a fireplace. It has all Bridgetower's music in it. So in that way, that's where I guess our work begins, right? And just being curious. And we all, as musicians, we're curious people, but we just have to kind of set that tone and play and make sure that other people are doing that too, and pass that gene of curiosity on. Man, Annie Fuller, Cavani's are just great examples of that, right? Just always looking to see what's under this stone, what's going on there, So they've been great mentors to me since I was, well, I won't say the age, but.
We have another question. Who are some of the other scholars in the U.S. researching Bridgetower? And are there other unknown performers of color at this time that you know about?
That's a great question. I think that, okay, so I'll have to start with Dominique Delerma, who was for so long teaching at Lawrence University, and he passed in 2015. I actually have, something I didn't quite mention is that in this search that I was looking for self, why am I so passionate about classical music, classical violin, and I don't see anybody that really looks like me at least 20 years ago, right, doing it? Like, why is that? I'm sure my father played, but I wasn't really, it was confusing. So that was back in the day where you actually could just pick up the phone, go 411, can I speak to, yes, who are you looking for? Michael Jackson? Sure, 401-332. It was, I am not lying to you, Clara. It's like, and so, I had this book of Black composers that was written by Aaron Horn, 1992, something like that. And it was like a phone book for me. And I just flipped, and I just like, can I speak to, Courage Taylor Perkinson? Can I speak to, Anthony Davis, Tanya Leon? And those were my researchers, because they went through the same plight in some way or another, and then they had some source or resource that they could share with me. So to speak to your question about people of color, that's what I did. George Walker, it's weird, right? You can just pick up the phone, 411, George Walker, please. So that was one. I was so curious about music back. I still am, but I really always want to just talk. I want to hear what these voices that have been in the trenches for so long, what they're doing. But Dominique Delerma is probably arguably the greatest musicologist of music of African descent in the classical realm. And I was saddened that he died a year before I started my doctorate, but we had done many exchanges, and he had talked about Bridgetower to me, and I wish today I could talk to him more. But Josephine Wright at Wheaton College, I believe she's retired now. There are quite a few, and not simply people of color, but those that are invested and committed to centralizing Black composers, people of color, inside of the classical canon.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Now, if there are no more questions, maybe let me just check, make sure I'm not missing anybody here.
Thank you all for sticking around.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Cherry. It's been such a pleasure. I love I love hearing about your passion. And it really inspires me. And then I hope it inspires our students and our audiences who are here to explore the farthest reaches of their intellect and passion as well. So yes, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
No, I was just going to say it's been a great pleasure, and my only regret is that I can't be there with you all, but I can't wait to see the concerts and things like that. I'm going to follow along, of course, and I just love what you all are doing, and I'm just grateful to be able to share a little portion of myself in the midst of all of it.
We're so grateful to have you. All right, everybody, thank you so much for joining us.